Hello and welcome back to Whispers of Wisdom. I'm Kari Bandle, owner of Sacred Whispers Studio. Thank you for joining me today. Take a deep breath because today we're going to talk about something that might make you a little uncomfortable, and that's exactly why it's so important. Here's a question for you. What if the parts of yourself you've been trying to hide, fix, or eliminate are actually containing some of your greatest gifts? What if the traits you judge most harshly in yourself are holding keys to your creative power, your authentic expression, and your deepest healing? Today, we're diving into shadow work, not the surface level love and light, but the real, gritty, transformational practice that Carl Jung called essential for psychological wholeness. Now, before we go any further, let me be clear. Shadow work is not therapy, and it is not a substitute for professional mental health support. If you're dealing with trauma, serious depression, or other mental health issues, please work with a qualified professional. What we're exploring today is spiritual and psychological self discovery for people who are ready to expand their self awareness. I'm sharing this because I've seen too many people use shadow work as another form of spiritual bypassing, another way to avoid actually dealing with their stuff. Real shadow work is messy, uncomfortable, and absolutely life changing when done with integrity. So settle in, grab your journal if you like to take notes, and let's explore the profound gift of your inner darkness. Let's start with what shadow work actually is, because there's a lot of confusion out there. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who developed the concept, described the shadow as the parts of our personality that we've learned are unacceptable. So we repress them into our unconscious mind. But here's what most people miss: the shadow isn't just bad stuff. Your shadow contains everything you've learned wasn't safe to express or embody. Maybe you learned that being too smart made other people uncomfortable, so you dimmed your brilliance. Maybe you learned that showing anger wasn't acceptable, so you pushed down your healthy capacity for boundaries and self protection. Maybe you learned that being confident was arrogant, so you hid your natural leadership abilities. This is what Jung called the golden shadow, positive traits we've disowned and often end up projecting onto others. You know that person you really admire who seems so confident and self assured? There's a good chance you're seeing your own disowned confidence reflected back to you. The shadow also includes what we call the collective shadow, patterns that get passed down through families, cultures, and societies. These are unconscious agreements about what's acceptable and what isn't, and they shape us long before we're old enough to choose for ourselves. Here's something crucial: shadow work isn't about eliminating your shadow. That's impossible and actually dangerous. It's about developing a conscious relationship with your unconscious patterns so they stop running your life from behind the scenes. When we don't do shadow work, our repressed aspects leak out in projection. We see our disowned parts in other people and react strongly to them. They also show up in compulsive behaviors, relationship patterns that we can't seem to break, and creative blocks. But when we do the work of integration, consciously acknowledging and reclaiming these disowned parts, something magical happens. We become more whole, more authentic, more creative, and paradoxically more genuinely loving because we're not constantly fighting parts of ourselves. Think of it this way: every aspect of yourself that you're at war with takes up energy. When you make peace with your shadow, you reclaim that energy for creativity, love, and authentic expression. Let's talk about how shadows form, because understanding the mechanism can help you have compassion for yourself and others. Our brains are wired for survival. And when we're children, survival means belonging to our family and our social group. If we express a trait that gets rejected, punished, or abandoned, our nervous system learns that this trait is dangerous. This happens through what neuroscientists call mirror neurons. These specialized brain cells fire both when we perform an action and when we observe others performing the same action. They're how we learn by imitation, but they're also how we absorb unconscious patterns from our families. When a child sees that expressing anger leads to rejection, their mirror neurons fire as if they themselves were being rejected for anger. The nervous system learns anger equals danger. So anger gets pushed into the shadow, even though anger is actually a healthy emotion that signals boundary violations. Here's what's fascinating. Neuroplasticity research shows that shadow integration changes your brain structure. When you consciously work with previously unconscious material, you create new neural pathways. You're not just changing your psychology, you're rewiring your neurology. The amygdala, your brain's alarm system, is constantly scanning for threats based on past experiences. If you learn that being too much is dangerous, your amygdala will fire every time you start to express your full energy, triggering anxiety, shame, or the impulse to hide. But through conscious shadow work, you can teach your nervous system that it's safe to express previously forbidden aspects of yourself. This is why shadow work often involves somatic practices, working with the body and nervous system, not just the mind. The goal isn't to override your nervous system, but to give it new information about what's actually safe in your current life, as opposed to what was safe in your childhood environment. Before we get into practices, let's talk about the ways shadow work can go sideways. First, spiritual bypassing disguised as shadow work. This looks like saying, I'm working on my anger while never actually feeling angry, or I'm embracing my darkness while staying completely comfortable. Real shadow work makes you uncomfortable because you're facing parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Second, the perfected shadow trap. This is when people turn shadow integration into another achievement, another way to be evolved or healed. You'll know you're in this trap if you find yourself judging people who haven't done shadow work or believing you're more conscious than others because of your inner work. Third, confusing shadow work with trauma therapy. Shadow work deals with personality aspects we've disowned. Trauma therapy deals with nervous system dysregulation from overwhelming experiences. If you're working with childhood abuse, PTSD, or serious mental health challenges, you need professional support, not do it yourself shadow work. Fourth, using shadow work to bypass accountability. I've seen people claim that their harmful behavior is just shadow integration, when really they're avoiding taking responsibility for how their actions affect others. Shadow work includes taking responsibility for your impact, not using your inner work as an excuse for causing harm. Fifth, the difference between self awareness and self attack. Real shadow work involves curiosity and compassion. If your inner work is mostly self criticism and judgment, you're not doing shadow work. you're reinforcing shame patterns. Here's a key distinction. Accountability means taking responsibility for your actions and their impact. Self-attack means berating yourself for being human. Shadow work requires accountability, but never self-attack. Now let's get into some practical techniques that go beyond basic shadow work. First, trigger mapping. When someone triggers you, when you have a strong emotional reaction to another person's behavior, ask yourself, how am I like this too? Not to shame yourself, but to identify disowned aspects. If someone's selfishness really bothers you, explore where you might need more healthy selfishness. If someone's confidence annoys you, look for your own disowned confidence. The intensity of your reaction often indicates the intensity of your disownment. Keep a trigger journal. Notice patterns. What types of people consistently push your buttons? These are usually mirrors for your shadow material. Second, the villain exercise. Think of someone you really dislike, a public figure, someone from your past, even a fictional character. Write down all the qualities you hate about them. Then ask, how might these qualities serve me if expressed consciously and appropriately? For example, if you hate someone's manipulativeness, your shadow might contain strategic thinking or persuasive abilities that you've disowned. If you just despise someone's arrogance, you might have disowned healthy confidence or self-advocacy. Third, dream archaeology. Your dreams often contain shadow material. Keep a dream journal and look for reoccurring characters, especially the ones that disturb or fascinate you. These dream figures often represent disowned aspects of yourself. Practice dialoguing with dream characters. In meditation or journaling, have conversations with the parts of yourself that show up in dreams. Ask what they want, what they're trying to tell you, and how they want to be integrated. If you need help, put a few words from your dream into Google. I've been shocked at what comes up. Fourth, creative shadow expression. Your shadow often contains tremendous creative energy. Try writing from the perspective of your disowned aspects, creating art that expresses forbidden emotions or moving your body in ways that feel too much. Many artists know that their creativity emerges from integrating shadow material. The parts of yourself you judge more harshly often contain your richest creative potential. Fifth, somatic shadow work. Your body stores unconscious patterns. Notice where you hold tension. Where do you feel numb? Where do you feel overly sensitive? These physical patterns often correspond to emotional material you've pushed into shadow. Practice breathing into these areas, moving them consciously, or simply placing attention there with curiosity. Sometimes shadow integration happens through the body before it reaches conscious awareness. Let's spend some time on the golden shadow because this is where some of the most transformational work happens. Your golden shadow contains positive qualities you learned weren't safe to express. This might include brilliance that you dimmed because others felt threatened by your intelligence, confidence that you hid because you learned it wasn't humble, sensitivity that you toughened because you learned it was weak, power that you gave away because you learned it was selfish, creativity that you suppressed because you learned it was impractical. The golden shadow often shows up in who you admire or envy. If you find yourself consistently drawn to people with certain qualities, confidence, creativity, leadership, sensitivity, these might be disowned aspects of yourself. Here's a practice. Make a list of people you admire and identify specifically what you admire about them. Then ask, how am I this way too? Look for evidence of these qualities in yourself, even in small doses. If you admire someone's confidence, remember times when you've been confident. If you admire someone's creativity, acknowledge your own creative expressions, no matter how small. The golden shadow also appears in persistent fantasies or daydreams. If you constantly imagine yourself as a successful artist, a powerful leader, or a wise teacher, these fantasies might be pointing towards disowned potentials. Start expressing golden shadow qualities in small, safe ways. If you've disowned your power, practice setting small boundaries. If you've disowned your creativity, spend 15 minutes creating something, anything. If you've disowned your sensitivity, let yourself feel deeply about something that matters to you. Remember, the goal isn't to become someone else, it's to reclaim aspects of yourself that were always there but got pushed underground. As we close today's exploration of shadow work, I want to remind you that this is a lifelong practice, not a destination. You don't graduate from having a shadow. You develop a more conscious, compassionate relationship with your unconscious patterns. You learn to dance with your darkness instead of fighting it or pretending it doesn't exist. The parts of yourself you've been trying to fix, hide, or eliminate aren't your enemies. They're aspects of your wholeness that got separated from your conscious identity. Shadow work is coming home to yourself, all of yourself. This work takes tremendous courage because it means facing the parts of yourself you've learned are unacceptable. But here's what I know: you're braver than you think, more whole than you imagine, and more worthy of love than you've been taught to believe. Your shadows aren't obstacles to your spiritual growth, they're gateways to it. They contain not just your wounds, but your superpowers, not just your pain, but your creative potential. Next week, we're exploring ancestor veneration and the thin veil, how to connect with your spiritual lineage and receive guidance from those who've walked before you. Perfect timing as we approach Samhain and the season of spirit communication. If today's content brought up challenging material, please be gentle with yourself. Consider working with a therapist or counselor if you need additional support. Shadow work is brave work, and you deserve all the support you need. Remember, you're not broken and you don't need fixing. You're becoming whole, and that's the most sacred work there is. Keep listening for the whispers, especially the ones that make you a little uncomfortable. They might just be your soul calling.